Hello there, I've made a video before on coronavirus, but this time now we know a little bit more about it. I want to go into a bit more detail about the immune system, how it copes with coronavirus and the kind of problems that it can cause. Okay, so here's an overview of everything I'm going to talk about in relation to this coronavirus and the immune system. First of all, to understand specifically about the virus, we need to understand a little bit more about the immune system and how it normally responds to viruses within the body. So one of the main systems it uses is a system of cytotoxic cells. That name means a cyto bit is cells, means cells, and the toxic bit means kills. So there are cells in the immune system which go around killing other cells if they suspect that those cells are infected by a virus. So how that whole system works is you've got this receptor on a cell surface which is called MHC1 or major histocompatibility complex 1. What that's involved in is the process of antigen presentation. So when you've got a virus particle which comes inside a cell, it looks a little bit like that. It's got an envelope on the outside, it's got some DNA or RNA, in the case of the coronavirus in the center. And what the virus is going to do when it infects a cell is it's going to be assembling new virus particles, and the cell is also going to have some intrinsic defenses which start taking some of the virus particles apart. So there's going to be random bits of virus where it's replicating or it's being chopped up inside the cell, and those bits are stuck onto a receptor on the outside of the cell so that the immune cells can come along and they can recognize what's there through their own receptor, and they can tell whether a cell is infected by a virus or not. So an infected cell will display on its outside viral particles or parts of them, whereas a cell that isn't infected won't have anything like that on the outside. So that's one way in which your immune system recognizes if a virus is inside a cell through this process of antigen presentation. You also have the TCR or T cell receptor, which is on cytotoxic T cells. This is how they actually go about that process. So the TCR is going to be involved in the antigen recognition. And what it's also going to do is it's going to look at any cells and identify what are the normal ones, what are the abnormal ones. So this process is going on all the time whether you have a viral infection or not. Alongside these cytotoxic T cells with their T cell receptor working alongside MHC1, you've also got another group of cells called the natural killer cells or NK cells. These are a different type of white blood cell, and what they're going to look for is specifically cells with no or few of the MHC1 receptors. With those cells, it means that something is abnormal. Either they're infected by a virus, or they could be becoming cancerous, or some other abnormality, which means they're not expecting the receptors they'd expect to see on the outside. So the natural killer cell kind of does what the name says on the tin. They go around, they find these cells, and they go through processes to kill them. Now, some of those processes, whether you're talking about a cytotoxic T cell or a natural killer cell, there's some similarities. There's this substance called perforin, and what perforin does is it perforates the membrane. So it's a protein that makes little holes in the cell membrane. When you've got holes in the cell membrane, it can no longer regulate its water potential. Water could move in or out, causes the cell to burst or shrivel, and the cell dies. So the perforins are one thing that these cells produce to kill off any cells which are abnormal. You've also got granulysin, which is an enzyme which you find inside structures called granules in cells, which are a little bit like lysosomes. They contain enzymes such as this granulysin inside, and when they're given signals by one of the natural killer cells or a T cell, they release this granulysin into the cytoplasm. It breaks down substances within the cell and it causes the cell to die. Under normal circumstances, you don't really want that to happen, but of course, if a cell's infected by a virus, taking out cells with the virus inside is going to dramatically slow the speed at which it spreads through the body to allow you to bring it under control. There's also these substances, cytokines, which have drawn quite a lot of attention in media coverage about COVID-19 at the moment. Cytokines are a type of chemical messenger, so they're usually small proteins or something like that, and they specifically exchange signals between immune cells. So they work between different types of white blood cells, and they increase or turn down the speed of the immune response. And what happens with the T cells and the NK cells is if they find lots of cells which are abnormal or expressing virus, they release more cytokines, which then turns up the overall immune response. The next thing we're going to look at is macrophages. These are a different type of white blood cell, and what macrophages do is they're like the vacuum cleaners of the body. So they go around and they remove any dead cells or cell fragments, foreign particles from the body. So the macrophages have a really useful role in going around and clearing up the rubbish for every tissue in the body. If there are too many macrophages and if there's too much rubbish, again, they release cytokines, which can further stimulate the immune response, and it can actually turn it up too high, which we'll look more at later. And last couple of things on the overall immune response to viruses. You've also got these things called interferons. These are, again, chemical messengers as such, which go around in the blood. What they do, though, is they, first of all, inhibit the viral replication. Literally, they interfere with it, which is how they got the name interferon. What they also do is they signal to other immune cells. So they act in a similar way to cytokines in turning up the immune response within the body. You also have antibodies, which aren't necessarily specific to viruses, but they work for any kind of immune response, whether it's viruses, bacteria, fungi, whatever is infecting the body. The two things that they do which are important is agglutination. That's a posh word for basically clumping around the foreign matter. So if you have a virus particle, you have all of your Y-shaped antibodies, which form a little cluster around it. And that does something called opsonization, where it marks it for removal by your macrophages. And it also creates something where it inhibits the movement and it stops receptors on the surface working as it should do. So that's one way in which they defend against any microbes. You've also got phagocytosis. So this is where cells such as macrophages act as phagocytes, and they move around the body, and they're going to, again, remove your dead or damaged cells. Okay, so that's a little overview of how the immune system usually works. A few things to make this specific to the COVID-19 infection. A few terms that you'll have heard quite a lot in the media about pneumonia, about a cytokine storm, and also risk factors to do with obesity and somebody's age. So what we mean by pneumonia is this is where you've got a disease process which causes a build-up of fluid in the lungs. And that's going to be a problem because the fluid means you've got reduced area for gas exchange, so you can take in oxygen a lot slower to the body. And that then means there's going to be insufficient oxygen for respiration in tissues. How pneumonia is caused is primarily by the immune system. It's not the actual virus itself, the virus particles, which cause it to happen. It's the fact that in the lungs, you've got cells which are infected by the virus, which are then killed by your immune system, which then leads to the accumulation of fluid, the reduction in surface area, and a reduction in oxygen uptake by the lungs for cells to respire around the body. So pneumonia is a key part of the reason why COVID-19 is such a concern, because it quite often progresses this way. because it stimulates the immune system to kill those cells at a rate that the body can't keep up with in removing them and clearing debris from the lungs. Something else you may have heard is the idea of a cytokine storm. So cytokines, you'll hopefully remember, are those little chemical messengers which are used to send signals between immune system cells. What particular pathogens can do, such as the Spanish flu, which came around in 1918, 1919, and also this COVID-19, is they can stimulate the immune system very, very quickly in some people and not others. And we're not entirely sure as to the reason why that is the case. But when they stimulate the immune system too much, you get an excess of these cytokines, and you get the immune system which is put into overdrive. And when the immune system is in overdrive, what that means is it doesn't necessarily just focus on cells which are infected by the virus. It starts releasing lots of different chemicals and cytokines around the body. And some of these things that it can do is it can greatly decrease the blood pressure, which then makes it even harder to transport oxygen around the body and processes such as that. It can also stimulate your macrophages and phagocytes to start attacking cells and destroying them, which aren't actually infected by the virus at all. So it can cause further damage to the body. It can be thought of in the same way as a chain reaction, really, because as soon as this process starts going, unless something is there to damp it down, make it less severe, it can just keep building until it can lead to death. So the cytokine storm is where the virus triggers the immune system to overreact to the stimulus there and can be really dangerous in people. And coming on to the large risk factors, which are obesity and also being an older person who catches this disease. So first of all, to deal with age. With age, it's a relatively simple story because the immune system is going to become less efficient as you age. So you've got fewer numbers of lots of crucial cell types, and you've also got a tendency to overreact to things and lead to excess inflammation and potentially a cytokine storm in people that are older. With people that are older, you've also got the issue of they're likely to have other things wrong with them. These are called comorbidities. So anything else which is wrong with them is potentially going to increase their likelihood of suffering severe effects if they get infected by the virus. So that could be something like they've got high blood pressure, they could already have a lung issue, and they could be on certain medications. All of these things are going to predispose them to having a stronger, more severe response if they get infected with the COVID virus. And finally, on this issue of obesity, there are a few theories on that. What is certain is people who are obese tend to be overrepresented in a number of people who require ICU care, ventilation, and unfortunately die from COVID. That's a trend across all countries in the world, really. Some of the theories towards that are obesity can trigger something of an inflammatory state. So what that means is the immune system is already turned up higher than it should be due to inflammation in the body, which means that they react to things in a stronger way than people who are perhaps not obese. So that could mean that they're more likely to suffer from a cytokine storm and they're more likely to progress to pneumonia than somebody who isn't obese. And one of the reasons for this is you've got an increased number of macrophages in the fat tissue. And the virus, it seems, can also infect the fat tissue because its gateway that it uses is a receptor called ACE, which is present on the fat cells. So if the virus infects the fat, then the macrophages all come out of the fat, they release cytokines, and that can trigger a cytokine storm and then lead the body to progress towards pneumonia. There's also an issue with obesity, which is just associated with their weight, really. So that issue is that if somebody requires support of a ventilator, just the weight that they're carrying is going to put increased strain on the lungs. So they require more intervention, and it's harder to actually get them to be able to breathe on their own or to be mechanically ventilated successfully. So all of these things have been mentioned a lot in the media. They're all really important about the COVID, to understand the immunity of it and how it actually works. I very much hope that you found today's video fairly useful and informative, and by all means go and look up some more yourself on this interesting issue. Until next time, goodbye.